Welcome to The Table, a podcast where leaders pull up a chair and tell the real story, how they got there and how they stayed there. I'm your host, Jeanette Hernandez. So pull up a seat because this is The Table. Glodean, thank you so much for joining me today at The Table. I'm really excited about our conversation because I've watched your career over the years from corporate America to creating your own table. So I think my first question for you is what happened when you got to that, I'll just call it corporate table, that made you want to leave and go off and create your own table?
That's a really great question. But first, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Um, that that challenge was maybe threefold, but I'll only focus on the fold that matters the most. Um, I got into my career with no degree, but a love for tech. So I started in tech hands-on, and then got dragged into leadership. I'm saying dragged because I love the hand-on aspect of it,
Yes.
and leadership posed a different challenge. Um, but I was good at it because I think no, I don't think. Leadership is in my DNA. But what I
Agreed, by the
noticed
way.
what I noticed was in order for me to climb that corporate ladder, I was gonna have to leave a lot of my integrity, and I don't wanna say morality, but my humanity on the floor. Just the nonsense that I saw in the leaders that were above me and their expectations of me to quote unquote fit in, right? And so I thought, my aunt said I would never make any money unless I got a degree. And I was making six figures with no degree and on my way from director level up that ladder. And I thought, you know what? I've proven her wrong.
Always starts out with
and
auntie, doesn't it?
I've proven her wrong, and I have proven to myself that I can do this anywhere. I don't need the corporate structure to do the part of the work that I love doing. So I actually quit my corporate job at Bayer Pharmaceuticals, which I loved working there. And I went back to school and I got my bachelor's in English and my master's in writing and communication. And then I rejoined the workforce and I still didn't like it. And so I started my own thing because what I recognized, the challenge that I faced inside of those bubbles, those corporate bubbles, was all around the way people communicated or the way people received the way I communicated, right? So I grew up in a household where my mother taught me to ask for what you want. She always said a closed mouth doesn't get fed. So, I didn't do the passive aggressive, can I get a raise
Right.
thing. If I wanted a raise, I asked for a raise, or if I needed more money in my budget or whatever the thing was, right? And I wasn't willing to play politics to get what I wanted. But I recognized that the issue, like the main issue that followed me from hands-on tech all the way up to that point was communication.
And do you think but in communication, do you think it's the communication styles or the lack of transparency in communication? Meaning, lots of leaders, especially if you've got layers above you, they say one thing, but you have to read between the political lines because it usually means another. So, is it the
Right.
effective communication or the lack of communication that frustrated you at your particular place?
All of the above. Mm.
Well,
Because,
if it's both, which one taught you the best lesson for you to go off and start
um,
your own business?
it was the reading between the lines. Again, I grew up in a household with Francis Champion. I feel like everyone I should have like, if I could have made my mom a course that all leaders had to take, they should have all gone through the Francis Champion mode of communication, right? So, because she always said, "I'm not a mind reader, so tell
Correct.
me what you want," right? So, I think that the biggest challenge was people thought they were saying, and I'm not saying this in a derogatory way when I say this. Sometimes people have good intentions, and they think they're being transparent, and they think they've given you all the information, and they haven't. So that's one side of the problem. The other side of the problem is the person receiving the information is too afraid to ask for clarification, right?
Correct,
So
yeah.
the leader walks away thinking they've communicated effectively, and the person walks away confused and terrified because they don't want to look dumb,
Right.
so they don't ask for clarification, and then they usually wind up not delivering, or not delivering what, either not delivering altogether or missing key components of what the leader really wanted, because that's the part that they didn't ask for clarification.
The clarity. I hear that a lot from people where you're expected to know. It's more
Right,
of, "Here's your deliverable," but without understanding what that leader's really asking you for. Again, you
right.
gotta be a mind reader, and none of us are, but I
And
just
shouldn't be
think
expected to be.
it should not be. And we've been around the block for a second, so what do you think is, and there's been generational changes in leadership, but that clarity still continues today. Do you think there's an underlying, perhaps a leadership flaw in people because they don't teach us leadership? That's the funny thing about
Right,
corporate America. There are
right,
programs they put you in, but the day-to-day dealing with human beings, not dealing with the deliverables, but dealing with the people
right,
that have to deliver, there's very few companies that really invest in that skill. Do you think
right.
it stems from that or something else why that clarity confusion, I'll call it, happens?
Absolutely. It's all around the absence of that human emotional intelligence side of leadership that either isn't invested in or recognized it's needed,
Mm,
because and I'm going to speak, well, yeah, we're just same generation. We come from a generation of leaders who led by fear and intimidation. Do as I say, right? Again, Frances Campion was my first leader, and so she didn't have that do as I say. I was allowed to call her, if she did come off on that do as I say thing, I was allowed to challenge her behavior, right?
mhm. Right.
Um, I went into corporate America with that same,
It was a little bit different, wasn't it?
well, it was received differently, but I still did it because I didn't
Yes.
know any better, right? I got my
You know,
first job at 17, I didn't know any better.
that's a great point, though, because what you said earlier about leaving because of your integrity and morals and things of that nature, I think so many people find themselves, especially if they aspire to climb the leadership ladder,
Mhm,
they either make themselves smaller to fit in,
right,
they change who they are at the core so they're not happy, thinking that that's what they have to do to become a
right,
great leader. When really what we're finding out now, it's the opposite. It's the authenticity that is getting
right,
people moved up the ladder faster. Do you agree?
right. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree.
Well, you
But
agree
it's
because you went off and opened a company based on that. So sorry, I
exactly.
answered my own question.
Well, even when I was in corporate America, um, I will just say this to you. On my first job, again, I was 17 years old. The CEO hired me on the spot. He had to call my mother for permission to hire me. And he invited me to his first leadership meeting with his leadership team with an accounting firm. And I didn't know why I was in there. He just told me to sit in and observe. And so you tell me to observe, then that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
And when you ask me what I thought at the end, I'm going to tell you the truth.
He had no idea what he was in for.
No. And he was, I'm going to say Hal was in his 50s. Yeah, he seemed really old, but that's me, whatever. Um, when the meeting was over, he asked me what I thought. And I said, "You were so mean." And he went, "What?" And I said, "You were like talking over people and you were telling people, cutting people off so they couldn't finish their thought. And you called one guy stupid." I was like, "That's mean." And he said, "Well, that's what you have to be when you're a leader." And I said, "Well, if that's what it is, I don't ever want to be in leadership."
And I
And
do
after
believe
that,
that was the recipe back then. Absolutely.
yeah. And after that, he started inviting me to these meetings more
Interesting.
often. I
Mm,
was the
mm.
receptionist. Why was I in this meeting? And at the end of those meetings, he would say, "What did I do?" And I would tell him. And then I started to notice that the behavior I had already called him on was changing. And now we're focusing on other things. So, bottom line, I became a coach at 17 to a grown man who was the CEO of a very successful accounting firm. But I realized that the only reason he kept inviting me back into that room was because I was giving him the truth.
Most people are afraid. So they just walk away
Right.
confused and upset and they
Right.
internalize, was it and it's usually turned, "Is it me? Did I do something to
Right.
be treated that way?" And they don't even notice other people in the room because they're mortified if someone calls them stupid or yells at
Exactly.
them in a meeting. That's
Yeah.
interesting that I actually didn't know that little nugget from you, but so
Yeah. That was
your
my first
seeds
experience.
your seeds were planted very early to get you
Yes.
to the opportunity that you are at now. Can you share just a little bit about what you're doing now? Because you coach corporate, executive,
Mhm.
and then you
Mhm.
also coach with process. So
I
those 2 things together, I don't know if it's more one one is the, dog wagging or the tail wagging the dog. I don't know how they go together, but I'm sure from the conversation we're having, you'll share both of those.
Yeah, so I coach both executives and new and emerging leaders, but mostly I love coaching new and emerging leaders because they're like sponges, right?
Mhm.
I also do process improvement consulting, um, because process you're a process. I don't know if people I'm about to drop a real big nugget right now. Um, for you leaders out there who may not know this, the way your processes are set up in your organization are also communicating something to your employees. If they're clearly defined and they make sense and they make people's lives easy, you're communicating to them that you care about them. And if they're not, you're also communicating something with that too.
Yes.
So those are the two drivers for the work that I do. Because I realized, like, I was doing a Kaizen event um, a couple of years ago, and I realized that I not only coaching is part of it because you got to coach the executive team, you got to coach the team that you're working with, you got to coach their managers, and then you got to coach any employees that are feeling some kind of way because they're not in the room.
Mhm.
But then I realized it's a team building exercise that extends from the internal team that is now a cross functional team building exercise. But the linchpin to it all, the thing that either makes my life easy or makes my life a living hell, is around communication. How
Yeah.
well did the executive leadership team communicate to everyone why I'm there and what I'm going to be doing? Because then I'm not having to deal with all the drama that ensues. And then the communication in the room, uh, um, and whatever communication comes out of it, like all of it is
I
hinging upon how well people are willing to communicate the changes that are necessary, but also share that information with the leadership. And again, if they're in an environment where the leaders lead by fear and intimidation, it makes it makes my job and their confidence that much more of a challenge. They're building their confidence.
Yeah, you and I have had many conversations because we're both Six Sigma, and so most people think, oh, it's manufacturing, but if you can take the basic process skills, because not every
Right.
company is great at the process. That's actually
Right.
the easy part of the Six Sigma. The hard part is the communication.
Yeah.
And if that's not built in, and you've shared many stories with me over the years where you say, oh, so I met the leaders, they're all in. And then I went to the front line and they were all in to follow a new process. But then when it came down to the leaders talking about the strategy and how they wanted it to be executed and what the goals were, there was such a I'll talk of, like, layers. I was not even gonna say one step. There were layers missing where what you said earlier, the executives thought, "Oh, I'm communicating this. I told them exactly, what the goals are," but it's in the how. The why people, I think, are getting better at. Simon's done a great job on finding the why, but the
Right.
how is not always articulated. And when you're equating that to a new process or a new strategy, then you have teams that fumble because they don't have clarity around the how. Can I make a shortcut and do it in 10 days? Or are you
Right.
expecting us to rip everything out and re-put in all the plumbing? And without that piece, I think that that's what gets lost in the execution. And you had one particular client that I'll call them the frontline folks that were gonna execute. They
Mhm.
kept telling you, "Glodine, the problem is the CEO." I think you
Mhm.
have a couple of them, but I think you're gonna remember the one I'm chatting about. And over and over that
Immediately.
right? And you went directly kind of what you did from the beginning of your career, you went and had a direct conversation, but he couldn't hear anything. And then it ended
Mhm.
up falling apart. All of the process work you did went nowhere because he was not willing to adapt and listen to the people and communicate the way they needed to be heard. How do
Right.
you think, and that was a few years ago. So now, do you
Right.
see either for current leaders, and leaders aren't
Mm.
by title, right? That's one thing
No.
else you and I've had conversation. It's the person that speaks up and gets the clarity for the team that's
Right.
actually the true leader. But do you see now or say in the next 5 years, because I see leadership changing so rapidly between the remote
Mhm.
workforce, the multi-generational, AI. There are so
Right.
many things that a leader has to manage now, but I think the piece that you have that a lot of people are missing is you're teaching people to lead with humanity. Yes, we have
Yeah.
gold. Yes, we have this. But if you don't communicate, you say love a lot. You and Steve Farber are from the vein of you can love your employees. You should
Yeah.
treat them like family. What do you think are the skills that leaders today need and actually need better muscle memory as we go into the next 5 years?
Well, first, I'm gonna say that the biggest part of what you were just saying about that example, and in most situations where process is concerned, the how needs to not be from the top, right? They need to say, if waste is 99% of the process, then we want waste reduced, right? But the how is what the team is supposed to come up with. And
Mhm.
it's that disconnect that causes problems, right? Because a lot of leaders tell their employees how to do their jobs. But you
Correct.
hired me, I'm the expert. Let me do what needs to be done, right?
Doesn't that break
And
the 2
so
rules, right? You're supposed to hire people
always
smarter than you and let them do their job, which is I've heard for 30 years, but yet few do it. And
very
and
few.
and leaders should lead with no ego, and that's still happening.
Okay. Yeah. Um so here's the thing. Love is yes, love. Steve and I are in total agreement with the love because we're both referring to agape love.
Right.
Except I took that love to another level. So my love is also a communication strategy, which stands for listen to understand open-mindedly, which means you have to open your heart so your mind can follow.
Right.
I have finally understood people can't really open their minds if you just say open your mind, because if you have a belief and it's locked in, usually when it's locked in to that extent, your heart is in it, right? Which is why people can't let go of, or why people feel like they got to argue to the death about something, because both people are locked in at the heart level. The head is like a whole nother thing, right? And then there's vulnerability, right? So being willing to embrace vulnerability and then practice empathy, right? That's the love that I'm selling to people. And that is, I believe, the crux to emotional intelligence,
Mhm.
right? If you can listen, because sometimes listening starts here. You got to listen to yourself.
Correct.
And I'm gonna use that example of the leader not really communicating effectively
Mhm.
on both sides, right? So the leader that's communicating, usually in most cases, isn't listening with the right ear. If I'm talking to you and I'm trying to get you to understand, or I'm telling you what I need, and you don't understand what I'm saying, your face is doing something.
Yeah.
Even if you're trying to keep it
Okay.
straight, so you don't look like you're gonna have a slight there's gonna be a slight tell that you
Something.
don't understand, right?
Correct.
So, I'm not just listening to you with my ears, I'm listening to you with my eyes as well. And then I have to be open enough to say, "This person doesn't understand what I'm saying."
Right.
And then vulnerable enough to say, "Does that make sense what I'm saying?" Which is why when I'm teaching, I say, "Does that make sense?" It may be offensive to some people. I don't really care. What I care more about is that the 2 people that get annoyed by me saying, "Does that make sense?" The other 10 get to
Correct.
ask clarifying questions,
Right.
right?
'Cause you
and
open the
then show
door,
empathy.
and that's
Yeah,
right? The leaders usually talk and talk and talk and talk, 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 and they don't leave that
do
pause, which is a
right,
listening skill to what you just said, but they don't leave that door open or ask the clarifying questions to make sure people understand, they just
right,
expect them to.
right, right, which is where the empathy comes from, right?
Mhm.
So now I have to show you empathy that you don't understand. Here's the key I think that is missing, the other thing that's missing. One of the components I added into my leadership training is learning styles because people don't take into consideration that I can talk to you and tell you what I need or tell you how to do something because you're a new employee or you're doing something for the first time you've never done before. But if you're a kinesthetic learner,
Mhm.
you need to see it.
Yes.
You need to do it. It has to be a tactile experience,
Right.
right? Or you need to hear, if you're an audio, you have to hear it. So the people that can read something and take off and running, that's great.
Right.
That's how most people communicate toward um, people taking in information, right? But we need to take into consideration all the different learning styles so that people get it. And if you're, again, if you're not willing to recognize that this person isn't getting it, even though they're trying to act like they are, you have to take into consideration and help them. Make sure you hit you may not know their learning style, but you can quickly adapt to it if you build into your practice clarifying questions, asking what people need to understand. Do you need me to write this down? Do you need me to make a video of it? Or do you need to just do it yourself and then
Right.
you'll get it? Because I'm the do it, you can tell me how to do it and I'll remember that part. But if I do it one time, then I've got it locked in.
I think that's a great observation is that, from a
Yeah.
listening, active listening, it's 2 ways. And so you can't always expect your boss to ask a clarifying question. And if they
Right.
don't be afraid because
Oh, yeah.
eventually you're gonna have to ask it. And it's better to ask
Right.
it up front than 5 weeks after you got into a project.
Exactly. That was the other thing I was gonna go for the person getting the information, right? So if I'm listening to you and I don't understand, then I have to be open-minded enough to say, "I'm really uncomfortable because I don't know. So I need to just be comfortable being uncomfortable, right?
Right.
I think that's one of your opening of your mind requires you to open your mind enough to say, I am uncomfortable. And then recognize that unless you're standing in the middle of the street or on some train tracks and the train is barreling down the tracks at you, admitting that's not gonna kill you.
Right. Or
And
being
then
wrong. Right?
yeah,
Being wrong,
or
even
being
if you're wrong and you said, "Hey, I thought I understood this, but now that I'm
right.
in the project, I have to come back and ask some questions that I'm just not
That's the
quite sure about."
vulnerability part of
Right?
it. You have to ask questions and not be afraid to ask questions. And then again, the empathy towards yourself,
What I
right?
love
I
about
didn't
what you
understand that, and it's okay that I ask questions.
Right. What I love about what you're creating, what you've created over the past several years, is a lot of the executive or emerging leader consultants, mentors, start with the traditional, it's a personality test, and you go through these kind of standard movements. And that's just not where the world is. I think absolutely it's valid post COVID because
Yeah,
everybody went through something, whether it's I no longer want to go to an office because I found my work life balance that I can actually be home at 5 o'clock to be with my family or work out
right.
or do whatever I want to do. But also that isolation of becoming a remote worker and having to figure some things out for yourself. I think it actually made better employees,
Mhm.
but the communication is so I think more now than ever before. If we're not great communicators, and I don't care what level of employee you are, the problems that we see today are going to continue and get worse.
Yeah, I will take that great to effective,
Mhm.
right? Because striving to be great is like striving to be perfect, and there's no such thing as perfection.
Correct.
And the problem with ego centered leaders is if they think they're great communicators, there's nowhere for them to go.
Yeah.
But are you an effective communicator? You might think you're great because you say what needs to be said. The question is when it's received on the other end. That to me is the indication of how effective it is. So I would say Yes, strive or not strive, but it'd be great if you could be a great communicator, but great communicators are effective communicators. Those two things have to go together.
That is a great point. And the other thing is over the years, and I love that you, what you've created applies to everyone, whether you're 20, you're 30, you're 40, it does not matter because I will use the word great. Great leaders never stop learning and they never
Right.
stop working on themselves because if you can't lead yourself, you cannot lead others. I mean, that is the
Exactly.
golden rule. So, do you have any advice for people? It's okay to realize because I can tell you from when I was 20 to when I was 40, I was a completely different leader because I learned about myself and my communication style evolved. Would you give any advice to the listeners on how maybe what is the first step to communicating better or more effectively?
Patience and
Amen.
tolerance.
Amen. I had to learn that too. I'm
Because
still learning the patience piece.
me too. Um, and I didn't realize, and this kind of, it's funny, I have to say it anyway. Someone asked me once, how did I get so patient? They notice it when I deal with older people. And I said, because when you pray for patience, then you get more opportunities to be patient. And you can either rebel against them
Right.
and they will continue to come, or you can recognize the fact that, oh, wait, I asked for more patience and now I'm in this situation where I have to use patience. Maybe I should just try to be patient instead
There
of
you
getting
go.
frustrated.
Right.
So I recognize that the minute that you can be patient, which is why people don't ask questions, right?
Mhm.
Is because the person that you're asking questions of isn't patient enough to just answer all your questions. And I think that the best leaders are leaders who have children and who can understand that sometimes their employees are like children. And I don't mean that in an adolescent way. I mean that in a curiosity, need for discovery, need for understanding. Uh, Sometimes the people who have the courage to ask questions get the most patience because those leaders understand that they're trying to make sure that they get what they need to do their jobs correctly. I was always in that camp, right? I'm going
Right.
to ask the question because I came home with the D on my report card when I was in the first or second grade. And my mom was like, why do you have a D? And I
Yeah.
said, because I didn't understand. I think it was in math. And she was like, "So you mean to tell me I'm sending you to school to not understand something? Why didn't you ask questions?" And I said, because I didn't want to look like a dummy. And she said, okay, well, now you have a D on your report card, dummy. What do you think about that?
That's tough love conversations right there, right?
And I was like, I'm not gonna be a dummy anymore. I
Nope.
was always with my hand up if I didn't understand. And so I think that patience and tolerance. Because, we're also in a new era where we have people that speak different languages that come from different cultures. And if you understand that for instance, women in certain cultures are gonna take what you tell them and not ask questions because they've been taught not to ask questions. So
Correct.
your job is to understand that and just make sure before they walk away, you give them an opportunity to ask the question. If you ask them if they understand or you ask them if they have any questions, then you're opening the door for them to ask those questions. But sometimes they're not going to just ask that question
Yes.
because it's just not part of what they understand or learned. So we have a lot of different challenges. Um, in it, and
That's
I'm
a whole
saying
other
challenge is
podcast
not
what
the
you
right
just
word.
said.
Yeah.
We could talk for hours about that,
I
but
know.
I think it's really good because one of the, it's a great statement because a lot of folks are talking about the multi-generational workforce.
Right.
Because I know when I started, I followed the generation above me because I was expected that that's what the behavior is. It is not. Each generation has its own
Yeah.
unique personality, and I don't care where you are in your leadership journey, you need to be able to communicate. John Maxwell wrote a book, 360-Degree Leader, because you have to be able to
Mhm.
communicate up, down, side, and side. And if you're
Right.
not aware, if you say everyone should conform to the way that I think because I've got a title, A, you're in trouble. But
Right.
now you have to do the homework to what you were saying. So
Mhm.
and I'm making this up. So say a Gen Z. I'm not comfortable because I went through the pandemic where I wasn't able to ask questions, so I didn't get that muscle memory to be able to be, honest and open, whereas,
Mhm.
maybe a Gen X, has no problem at this point in their life asking all kinds of questions because they
Right,
don't care, they just wanna know and understand and do a good
right.
job. That's a whole different level of learning that you have to take upon yourself to be a better leader because there's no book that's teaching that. That's kind of
Nope.
building the plane while you're flying it,
Yeah,
and I think that brings a whole new level of challenge to people who are leaders because it's not just technical. Most of the time, it's never
right.
technical. It's
Mhm.
that
That's a small part of it.
correct. You need to know how to build the team, but then you need to know how to work with the team. Not work
Yeah.
on the team, work with your
With
team.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that takes different muscle memory than you probably had, and every team's different. So there's
yeah,
different skills you need along the way. So when you find someone that's not asking, what you've learned over the years is then you have to get them in a place where they feel comfortable and safe and acknowledged in
yeah.
order for them to continue to ask. Because a lot of times those unasked questions are the one that are on everyone's mind.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
there's always I mean, that's been my experience, up to this day. Even in my work that I do now, I might be on a workshop and I ask the question and then, I get put in a breakout room and the person goes, "I'm so glad you asked that question." And I do this every single time to every single person. "So you also were curious, but you didn't raise your hand to ask the question?" Like, we're in a learning environment.
Right.
It's safe to ask questions. So
But
here's
that
what I wanna
but
say
that teachable
to
moment only became because it was private between the 2 of you, right?
Right. Yeah. Here's what I wanna say to leaders. 2 things you can do. One is in the interview process when you're building your team, you ask this question of all your people. You tell them, "I want you to answer this question, fill in the blank. Most people are blank." Let them fill in the blank, right? You will get a good sense of who you're hiring based on how they answer that question. Most people have been taught to answer an interviewer's question or a leader's question by telling them what you think they want to hear.
Correct.
But the true people that you want to bring on your team are the people who will answer that question honestly. And I learned that from an interview that I had way back when when I was taking over the 911 network system at City of San Francisco, and my boss asked me to answer that question. And in tech, most people are difficult because they make the computer their own. They think they understand tech. If they're asking the applications development team to build something for them, they want them to build it based on what they think they want as opposed to what they need.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
your job to help them get to the middle of it, right?
Yep.
So that's the one question I would have everybody ask during their interview process. And then when you're in your role as the leader of this team and you get all your team members together, in the team you have them draw a pig. I think we may have talked about my pig exercise, but
Yes.
I really think these two things are helpful. You have everybody draw a pig and you give them a description of the pig, but the pig cannot have four legs. It's a three-legged pig, a three-legged, one-eyed, sideways pig.
Right.
And then you have them do it together in the room. And then you have everybody share their picture. And it does two things in that moment. A, it helps everybody see that they all heard the same instructions, but they all
Correct.
drew a different pig.
Correct. Exactly. Yep.
The smaller pigs are gonna be your people who are gonna be afraid to ask questions,
Mhm.
who are gonna be afraid to speak up because they drew a little pig because they don't want you to really see the little
You wanna be
pig,
little.
and
Yep.
they really, really focused on making sure that pig is perfect, except I asked you to draw a three-legged sideways pig.
Exactly.
A three-legged one-eyed pig, and then the people who draw normal-sized pigs are gonna be your people that are probably more likely to ask clarifying questions or speak up in meetings. The people who are more hesitant to share, are the ones you have to watch out for, right? Because
Right,
those are
right,
like I said. So your job as a leader is to always have your eye on your entire team, not the people that operate like you do. And I know a
right,
lot of the reasons why I don't like DISC is because a lot of leaders will hire, if they're a C, they're going to hire a lot of C's. And then they get somebody like me on their team who's an I, like almost 100%. But most leaders that are S's have C's have S's and C's on their team because
right.
I's disrupt
Gravitate.
things and make things
Mm,
difficult.
right.
But you need the whole disc on
You
your
need the whole
team.
disc. Yeah. Yep.
So anyway, those are the two recommendations I would have. Ask the question in the interview, draw the pig uh in your team, and then you get a good sense of who your people are. And
Right.
a fun and it's a fun thing to do.
Sure, yeah, and nobody's really understanding why you're doing it. I'm sure they know a
Exactly.
reason, and if you wanna share with the team why you asked them to do it, now you're able to give them a
After.
little insight, right, a little insight
Yeah.
about themselves. Well,
Yeah,
thank you for
afterward.
leaving the listeners with, some great advice and something to definitely think about, and thank you again so much for joining me today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Take care. Thanks for listening to The Table. If you like this episode, please follow us and subscribe so that others can find us. Until next time, go out and find a seat at your table.